In this video, we're going to find the exact value of cosine inverse of the cosine of 5 pi over 4. So the first thing that we want to do is when you have a problem where you have a trig function and its inverse composed, the best thing to do is start from the inside and work your way out. So for this particular problem, we're going to turn cosine 5 pi over 4 into a number, and then we're going to work from there. So let's go ahead and look at that part. Cosine 5 pi over 4, if you notice what I have written in blue, anytime you're looking for the cosine of theta or an angle on the unit circle, it's always just going to be the x value associated with that angle. And so we're interested in figuring out the x value associated with 5 pi over 4 since we're looking for the cosine of 5 pi over 4. So just going along the unit circle, right here is what we're interested in, 5 pi over 4, and the x value associated with that is negative square root of 2 over 2. And so anywhere we see the cosine 5 pi over 4, we can put negative square root of 2 over 2 in its place. And so now let's bring this original problem that we had down, and instead of saying the cosine inverse of the cosine of 5 pi over 4, let's now write it as the cosine inverse of negative square root of 2 over 2. And so now the problem is a little bit less complicated. Now it breaks down to just finding the exact value of a cosine inverse. So remember, when we're interested, when we have the cosine inverse of a number, and that's our problem, what we're looking for is the answer is going to be an angle. And so we need to restrict ourselves to the first and the second quadrant since we're talking about cosine inverse. So don't forget about that also, because otherwise you may come up with the wrong answer. And we're looking for a place on the unit circle in quadrants 1 and 2 where we have an x value of negative square root of 2 over 2. And so looking in these quadrants, you can just kind of scroll along. We want negative square root of 2 over 2, and that happens right there. And so the angle associated with the x value of negative square root of 2 over 2 in quadrant 2 is going to be 3 pi over 4. And so that means that our overall answer is going to be 3 pi over 4. And so just some things to keep in mind when you're doing these problems. Like I said, work from the inside out. We turned the cosine 5 pi over 4. Remember, cosine or sine or tangent, whatever, is going to take an angle and it's going to give us a number. So we got a number for that. Then we wanted to take the cosine inverse of that number. And remember, the inverse trig functions take a number and it gives us the angle that's associated with that number. So it's kind of like we did both parts of this puzzle, just working from the inside out. The only other thing to remember is when you're working with these inverse trig functions, just remember which quadrants they're going to be defined in. So cosine inverse is only defined in quadrants 1 and 2, and that's why we chose 3 pi over 4 and not just 5 pi over 4. Also, one last thing to notice, it's interesting in this case that the cosine inverse and the cosine did not just destroy each other, leaving 5 pi over 4. If you jumped to that conclusion and you went through that process and just canceled them out and wrote 5 pi over 4, the answer would be wrong because cosine inverse is not defined in quadrant 3. So keep that in mind and watch out for those mistakes, but otherwise you should be good.